It's a pleasure to be a part of this symposium that Marna has put together. I'm very thankful for that. I want to talk a little bit about our paper in the special issue of the Journal of Environmental Education, which is called Assemblages, Sex, Gender, and Sexuality in Environmental Education, Diagramming Creative Critical Ontologies. One of the interesting things about this paper, and I'm only going to try and talk for 5 minutes, so it's hopefully going to entice you to read the paper and the special issue. One of the interesting things is that Nick and I, my co-author, we came to environmental education because we were going to do a chapter in a book for science education about desire and queering science education. So we found Noel and Aneko's chapter on Camp Wild I think it's in the Canadian Journal of Environmental Education. And so we came to environmental education as a discipline, although I'm kind of connected because of science education. We came to it through sex, gender, and sexuality. So one of the themes of our paper is basically saying that sex, gender, and sexuality can be, and maybe even should be, a central part of environmental education. And it's a larger discussion, I think, which the special issue addresses. But what we do in our paper is we sort of set the tone for bringing sex, gender, and sexuality into environmental education through a queering of environments or a queering of nature. And we also sort of tie queer struggles or struggles of sex, gender, and sexuality into the struggles that we normally see as being a part of environmental education. So in the paper, in a nutshell, uses queer theory and queerness to disrupt spaces of environmental education. And we do so in a way that also brings together, has a sort of sexual component. So in our use of queering in this paper, we see sexuality as something that shouldn't be dropped from a process of queering. So and that's just to keep queer as a kind of a really subversive element, I think. So our feeling was in the paper that if you drop the sex from queer, you lose its cutting edge, so to speak. And there are many other aspects related to sexuality and the environment. Struggles in sex, gender, and sexuality also have to have a sort of a critical ontological component to them. Power is exercised in the body and in the spaces where bodies are found, in the sort of the fields, the material ontologic fields that bodies are found in. So we sort of make connections there. What we're also after in this paper is, through an exploration of sex, gender, and sexuality, we're after a sort of a new ethics of connectivity. And we draw from Karen Barad's notion of interactions and ethical responsibility through these interactions to sort of build that argument. So what I'm going to do in this short presentation that's going to entice you to read the paper is I'm going to go through some of the critical diagrams or diagrams that we make in trying to make sense of this. So one of the reasons we also went headlong into diagramming is we use diagramming not only as a sort of a critical methodological tool to write with, but we also try and work with our students in this way in bringing together diagrams of social issues, of environmental issues, of that bring together discursive and material components together. So in this paper, there are a series of these, and I just want to take you through them really quickly. Marna said 5 minutes, so I'm probably going to go over that. But so the first diagram in the paper, again, the best way to view this is to see sexuality and gender and sex sort of dispersed through environments. So we talk about the emergence of the idea of viral infection in human communities and in a sort of overall community of abiotic and biotic entities. And we sort of try to put it together in an assemblage of related entities, and to see, and we use Karen Brad's theory of interaction to see how these things emerge in the world coextensively. So how retroviruses, marginalized communities such as the queer communities, are sort of made together in environments, so that not only are they coextensive, do they co-emerge together, they're also the differences between a marginalized community and a normative community or a majority community are sort of cut together, and so there is no natural difference between these entities and environments. They're sort of made. And we use sexuality and gender again to sort of show that. So the example of HIV infection is an emergent phenomenon, and in the emergence of this phenomenon, you could call it a biological phenomenon, you also have the cutting of social phenomena. So we talk about it in this assemblage in the paper. We also talk about our own exploration into how we see the world and how we see ourselves in the world. And we do this in a way where we try to queer ourselves in this paper by taking a fictional trip to a place called Camp Wild. And this is an excerpt from one of the chapters we wrote together earlier in 2014 and 15. And this is a map of our camp. And so you can see we have, I could turn the laser pointer on. We have a sort of an adventure in our camp where we're here and we go through a fictional adventure in the camp, and we discover a body. The body has been put there by someone, but we don't know who it is. And so we sort of get into a mystery of who we are in the camp as queer campers. So again, we get into topics like bodies, and we get into topics like telling campfire stories. And in the paper, we have an excerpt of our dialogue there. Another assemblage that we have in the paper is we talk about the importance of becoming, and how becoming different in environments is very important, and how all of us and the world are sort of shot through with these virtual ways of being and becoming. So there's always something in the making in all of us, and we talk about the importance of that for environmental education. We also, so one of the assemblages we made was thinking about urban environments, which often I think gets lost in environmental education. But with people moving to urban environments, how these are spaces, or what we use the term contact zones, Pratt's contact zones, to discuss how communities, racialized communities, oppressed communities, how institutions of power, and how sex, gender, and sexuality is interwoven through all those aspects of those environments, come together and create these contact zones, which have activist possibilities. And we also talk about how there are very sharp and damaging dualities and dichotomies interwoven into our world, and how queer beings can emerge by troubling these dualities and dichotomies. And it's not that these dualities and dichotomies are wholesale wrong. Well, we also just make the argument that because things emerge together in environments, the presence of everything that we see and touch, what we determine is different from something else, is something that emerges together. It's coextensively emerges in environments together. So it would do students and teachers a world of difference to begin to look at these things. And again, the presence of sex, gender, and sexuality, its centrality to who we are as beings, in terms of our desire, in terms of what we see as worthy of pursuit or recognition, becomes a central theme, I think, in this co-emergence. Let me also talk a little bit about desire. So I've probably rushed through that in a major way. So I think maybe just to leave you with some questions which might be useful. The central question that I wrestle with for environmental education, and I think this is where this paper, I think, and the special issue ties in so nicely, is what are the ethics of responsibility that we have if our very being is non-essential, in the sense that all of us and everything we see in the world is queer, in the sense that anything is possible because things co-emerge together. And because things co-emerge together and anything is possible, that means that the very universe that we live in can be seen as a queer universe. So that's a very grand way of saying, well, if we're all coextensive together and we all emerge together, what is this ethical responsibility that we bear towards, not just towards the human other, but towards all of the entities in the world that co-emerge with us, that we make in the world? So the paper gets at this large ethical question that I think is at the heart of environmental education. And just to conclude, this is why we really think sex, gender, and sexuality needs to be a part of environmental education. And by saying that, we're also saying that things like anti-racist struggles, things like struggles of labor, all of these issues need to be a part of environmental education. That we need to expand the boundaries of environmental education. And so Nick and I were very happy to come on board and be part of this project. And we've now sort of moved into the field of environmental education. And this is how we got there. So I hope your conference is going very well, and thank you for listening.